that those of you who have produced a magnus opus on this whole thing, and I don't refer to you at all. I hope you forgive me. As I say, this is really eclectic. So off I go. I saw the word historic on the thing, and so I thought, okay, I should start in someplace historic. And I thought, well, in Ishboffin, this is mentioned in the St. Coleman coming to in Ishboffin, I think 664 AD. And I think as well the abbots of this monastery, on this island, they were mentioned by the four masters up into something in the 10th century. Each one of them was listed. So I thought to myself, this is a place maybe where I might begin. And also, it took me way back to more or less close enough to the beginning of researching Galway, when I was a student, by the way, in UCD, a PhD student, BSc and PhD, and messed around, and finally kind of just managed by fluke to get a job in Galway. So this was, so this is where I'm taking you to first here. This, these islands, of course, are very important. You can see here another little marker here on the Google map, and this, of course, is High Island. And these are really important for the early historic period. Again, just using Google Map, actually, I was a bit aghast when I looked at it 2 or 3 nights ago, and I pulled out this picture. I saw Church Lake beside the medieval church site on the eastern end of the island, and I see that it is hardly any longer a lake. And so, as I said, this is down memory lane part of this initial part for me. And I thought this would be easy, but of course it never is, because you have to go along and scan slides, pull out old data, do the whole lot. And so I, yes, managed to scan some of the slides. This is the medieval church. There are early Christian cross slabs there. There's Bullon stone. There is more or less the whole works there. Again, I suppose this is something like 1200s, I don't know. But as I say, it is presumably something that followed on from the early monastic site of St. Coleman. Just the lake itself, this is actually from the day we cored it, and the little boys marking these, the 2 cores which we took, and you can see the lake in the meantime has really infilled. So there is change. In the past, some of you were born when we worked on this. And again, as I said, I just thought I'd pull out these photographs because so much time has gone that they are history at this stage. And of course you don't see these landscapes or anything else. And as I say, the lake itself, here we are coring the lake. And I thought I'd pull out this as well. The equipment where we went out to core the lake on, a tar barrel on which we had a few planks of wood attached. I remember once the professor, Michael Mitchell, was a really nice guy in botany, and he was, I was about to set up out, and he said, well, actually, how do you core lakes? And he said, no, I won't ask. This was before health and safety and all these things entered in. Actually, this here, but this our Orange Cook and Paddle before this was retired boatman, poor boatman is dead, passed on. And this is Karen Malloy. Karen actually wasn't involved in this, but she was already here as a student in Galway. And this is us at the end of coring. Just again, kind of, as I say, this is a little bit of a trip down memory lane for me, so I thought, I hope that, I suppose as well, it gives an idea of how the thing was done. And I think that's one of the purposes of the lecture is to kind of, I'm not going to give you lots of detailed results. I want instead to give you maybe a little bit of a feel for landscape, for how we did, the results we got, rather than getting lost on results. But no sooner say that than I put up this. Well, this was the public library produced in the late 80s, early 90s. Idel Nigronia, she had since, she went off and did something else in her life since then. But just to give you an idea, here, down here, these are the green, blue is the the woodland pollen, the arboreal pollen. We're down here at about the elm decline down here, and it was kind of more or less full woodland. You can see a little bit of disturbance here with Plantago, with Plantain, and a date there, which is approximately right. Then you have the Bronze Age, and it's the Bronze Age when this thing shifts. You can see that the blue, the woodland retreats, the pasture, this is the pasture, and this really expands, Plantago, and grasses, etc. And this more or less continues on in a steady fashion until what I have put in here, late Iron Age lull. These are the approximate dates that we have got from that. And then, so we are near the beginning of what is really interesting us. And you can see this late Iron Age lull. It was a period of inactivity, and you can see the way the natural system responded. The arboreal pollen came back to what it was pre-Neolithic people, and you can see the indicators of human activity just contracting. So I'm going to now, I think in the next slide I have for you from this up, just to give you, because this is what I thought, okay, I've promised I will concentrate on this, so here I am concentrating on it. Well, you can see here this complete change from this wooded environment into once again an open environment. And the date here, 550 AD. One of the things, by the way, I thought I would be as well is open. I always try to be open. But, and tell you, you know, the weaknesses in all this. And I see White Belly, I think I saw him sneaking in someplace there. And yes, on the chronology, so I knew I would have some tough opposition here with this. I must admit that the chronology of this is very tricky, because like most Irish lakes, you cannot radiocarbon date the last 2,000 years, because there's so much inwash coming in that the radiocarbon method doesn't work. You are dating old material. And this was the case in this. Actually, the last valid radiocarbon date was about here, and with a few dates from up here, and they were all much, much too old. But I don't think this spoils the record in the sense of that it just shows you. I like this diagram actually, that's why I put it up as well. Because very often in the medieval period, etc., and for us pollen analysts looking at these diagrams, we very often find very little evidence of arable farming. And this one, okay, these the grasses and plantain and the dandelions, but here, these red curves, these are a suite of cereals and, you know, consistent good record of cereals, crucifer, weeds. All these are weeds of arable farming, including this little last thing here, and phosphorus, a little tiny little liverwort. You'll find that sometimes go around in garden centres to look at it in pots, because that is the habitat. But a tiny little thing, and it is, the spores very consistently, I think probably pollen analysts often miss it, but it is a really nice indicator of arable farming. So we have here the initial phase of the medieval period, pastoral, and then a strong arable component out here on Inishbofin for a lot of the medieval period. So I thought, okay, this is, I suppose one of my interests is to try and figure out, you know, this pastoral arable divide, the intensity of it, and obviously of interest is the creation of this, the open landscape that we have now, because that has happened in the last 2,000 years. Yeah, I have already. Now, I just wonder, will this work? Maybe it will not. I can't get the little mouse. No. I will get the next one. What I have on this is, I have a series of, as I say, I indulge myself, and as I said, I just hope that to give you kind of glimpses of some of the glimpses that we've had into the past, and maybe hopefully they will kind of inform the discussion, the detailed stuff that will come out during the course of the conference. Several of you know that we've spent quite a lot of time out on this island, from working on a core from this island here in a sheer, Unlock Moor at the very end. And of course, the Aran Islands, in general, they're famous for the forts, etc., but also for the medieval stuff, the ecclesiastical settlements, the tower houses, etc., that are on it. And of course, just a list here of some of the stuff on this island here in Asia. Now, I must admit that it wasn't that attracted us out there. I just popped up this as well because, as I say, I'm not giving a lot of detail because the detail is available and you can look at it. I think hopefully, if you're interested, go back and look at some of these things. I just, in this connection in a series, I just refer you to this one here. It's a thing that the Galway Archaeological Historical Society, for 20 years we've been promising we'd produce an article for them. And so they finally kind of really twisted our arm and we produced an article. And I hope it is useful in the sense of that there have been several papers written on this of various interests. And we have kind of at least referred to them all in this paper here. So, you can easily go to that and see what is being done on this. The lake itself is unlocked more than an actual lake, and here it is at the very edge of the island. The place is shipwreck from the 60s here. It is in an absolutely lovely location. It is actually, there is a connection between, this is all plastic limestone, and there is actually a connection in the jointed limestone between the sea and here. So it rises by maybe a few centimeters with each day, twice with each day as with the tides. So it is just slightly brackish. So this is the lake. It's about the only large lake actually in the Aran Islands of the Burn. And again, St. Goblin's church is, where is it? Here. Here is the railway strip, here it is here. This is the fort and the townhouse, the O'Flaherty or O'Brien, which is O'Brien, the O'Brien Tower House here. So that just gives you the relative position. Again, as I say, I'm kind of indulging myself just to show you us working. In 1996, actually, we cored this and worked on it then towards the end of the 90s, beginning of the 90s. And we were lucky enough at this stage that University of Kiel came over with their coring equipment to core this and other lakes. This was the last one we cored. Just to give you an idea of the sediments, we took 3 parallel cores. This is just part of one. So the top watery sediment on the top, then the next drive, and actually there was a lot of sediment in this. I think it was something like 12 meters of sediment. Sorry, total 12 meters is the post glacial. There was a lake glacial at the bottom. A total 14 meters of sediment. And that lay, yeah, there it is there. And that lay beneath about 23 meters of water. Actually, one of the interesting things in this is just to show you the difficulty you have. By the time we took up, especially the lower sediment, what was down in the lake, 1 meter long or 2 meters, they come up in 2 meter drives, 2 meters long, it would, by the time it got into the boat, it was 2 meters 40 almost, because of the expansion as it reached surface pressure. So, you know, as you struggle with these measurements and depths and everything like this, it is a kind of a, it's fun, it's fun. This is the pollen diagram from Karen Malloy, who's contributed enormously to all of this research. This is, again, I've just put in a version that is similar to what I showed you from Inishbofin. Here are the tall canopy trees. Sorry, this is Corylus, hazel. And then these are tall canopy trees. From here to here is all woody. So you can see full woodland cover. You can see the first farming, the Neolithic. You can see a regeneration phase at the end of the Neolithic. Put in here about what maybe might be June Anderson. Here is what is this late Iron Age lull. A regeneration phase. And here actually, you know, this regeneration phase as a result of this, it must be, lack of human activity. In each environment it looks different. In this one, I think it's really interesting because it's the only diagram where we've seen a huge amount of juniper scrub. If you're in Scandinavia today, and in these pastures they have, and I think if the pastures are, the cattle are taken off, you will get juniper scrub. And here, this is what happened at the back. And the top part there in the last 2,000 years, for me it's interesting because A, it shows again the same features. I think I have them actually pull them out here. Yeah. I have here, this is the juniper expansion, late Iron Age lull. And actually at the end of it, Taxus yew expanded as well. This island is interesting because actually way back at the end of the Neolithic, there was the yew expanded to become the dominant tree on the island. But this is an island, don't forget, there's no tree growing in Victoria's Way. So here it is again, this is the late Iron Age lull, and then we have the last, later say, 1,600 years. And I think much the same sequence. You can see, first of all, pastoral-based, and then an arable-based. And the difference between this and Boffin is that Sakale rye is very important. And so it's around something, in my recollection, something like 700 AD, rye comes in, expands, and again, just a feature of it that of the record, you can see here at the top that rye decreases. In other words, the last maybe 2 centuries. Rice has been grown there until the 1950s. Oats and rye are the crop. But probably what I think has happened here is that at this point they were growing maybe rye and potatoes in equal quantity. And the potato, it produces a flower, but its pollen is never dispersed. And so you don't see that. And the other nice thing I think about this record is this little bit of the last few samples that were analyzed. You can see beech pollen, and you can see also this Potamogeton. This is an aquatic, and this lake, one side of it is filled with this aquatic Potamogeton. And it is clearly, since about the 1950s, it's a kind of an indication, it's responding to pollution. Increased tourism, increased runoff into the lake. So, well, it's always reassuring, I think, if you can connect up what you're seeing in these records with the historical record. If you cannot, I think you lose a degree of credibility. You know better than I do. I live in a bubble, of a paleoecology bubble, and we are not too pushed about the historical record very often. But still, we are, you know, it is important that there must be some relationship. Now, I have discussed these things. I just just now, this is taking you off into another sphere of this. As I say, this was a kind of multidisciplinary study, and we had a geochemist from Potsdam involved in the study of this, and he analysed the geochemistry of the whole profile. And these are some of this is aluminium, calcium, calcium-magnesium ratio, total organic carbon. These are the cores, etc. And he, back in around 2002, we published a paper on it, where he produced a theory that he could identify by these elevated levels of calcium carbonate in the sediment, he suggested that this was a response to wet periods. So, in other words, I'm trying to bring in a little bit of the climate element in it. This here is this calcium-magnesium ratio. Plotted this because in this direction it's decreasing salinity. So here increasing salinity here. So here he came down here at the bottom, here at where was Neolithic? Yeah, end of the Neolithic. That there was sea levels, Holocene sea levels had risen and was impacting on the lake. You know, if you want to, a paleoecologist looking at climate change, you always have to look along and see, does anybody else agree with you? And if you find a few people who agree with you, you are very happy. And so he has this French paleoecologist, lake study person. He has produced curves for changing lake levels in southeast France. And so these are here, these black are his periods of wet periods in southeast France. And Scheckler, the main author of this paper, he says, okay, the match is very good, so I'm on the right track. And so I'm mentioning this because, as I said to you, I want to be open and tell you about, some of all the results are not exactly, everybody's entitled to their opinion. There's another group involved in this research, and this person was an Austricard person, Holmes in the UK, in UCL, University College London. And he studied these little animals, and this is the shell they produce, and they molt about 6 times. I think within kind of, every 6 weeks they produce a molt, they leave the shell, and the shell contains a record of the environment, and you can analyze that. Now, on the basis of that, another paper that was published on this, just to reconstruct once again the various changes in the environment here. First of all, this is the time scale from the beginning of the post-glacial to the end. Last 2,000 years is what's of interest to us. But just to give you an idea of what is in this complicated figure, first of all, there is the sediment thickness at the bottom of the lake. And of course, we know that. We know at every point how thick the sediment was. So here is the 12 meters of sediment that had accumulated at the end of the Holocene. We know that. The next curve, it's our best guess. It's the lake level change over the last 11,500 years. So you can see it is a major changes. That's the sediment thickness, 14 meters, so it's 20 meters. It's the lake, the lake levels have changed massively. And of course, the lake levels, normally lake levels are dependent on precipitation, on temperature change, etc. So they are a kind of a proxy for climate. On this case, don't forget we are beside the sea. And I suppose one of the things I should say to you is, look, the late Iron Age lull, we have lower lake levels, so possibly in the Roman Iron Age, warmer. So that's the reason. And then the lake level increases enormously, and that we think is coming not from the temperature, from the climate change, but from the sea level change. here is our salinity curve. It is here that increased salinity is impacting. So you can see that if you go on the views put forward in this paper, you get a pretty different picture from the last. Which is correct, who knows? And so I kind of finish off by I suppose I'm putting this out as a kind of a warning in the sense that, you know, you take a record from a particular site and you give it very often you're inclined to give it a universality which it probably doesn't deserve. And in this case here you can see our efforts striving to reconstruct climate. And obviously you have to realize this is the basin, this is the sediment, this is the present day water level. But how high the sea level outside is determining what the general water table inside is. And the general water table inside will generally be just a little bit below the sea level because of this particular relationship. So, you know, but I will tell you as well that Sheckler actually took this into account and this factor, and we also tried, I say we, actually my name is in the Sheckler paper as well, even though I find it very difficult to accept some of the conclusions he has already arrived at, but he may be right. Okay, now, so again, as I say, I would like to take you up then to another site, not very far away, just onto the Burren mainland, and let you have a little look at some results that, more recent results again. Well, this was a part of a study, actually what I'm showing you is only a small part of a PhD study by Ingo Faeser, who was a student from, a German student from the University of Kiel, who came and did a PhD with us in the later noughties. And looked at, in this part of it is concerned with this part, the uplands here, and the uplands down around Mullaghmore, Slievruagh down here, Capanawalla, Gorta Clare. And I have just put in the detail from those two squares because the results are coming from those two squares. And so the analysis carried out were from the tops of these hills. So away altogether from lakes. And just to look at recent environment. What attracted us there? Well, first of all, just a few pictures to figure, all of you I'm sure are familiar with these landscapes, but just to remind us. This is from on top of Capanawalla, which is just to the west of Ballybohan. This is the nice Ballybohan Valley, the fertile valley, with today lots of scrub, hazel scrub. On top of this Capanawalla, there's this wonderful pavement. Mainly without any soil, nothing. But of course, human activity, we see actually the main evidence for human activity were not these circles, dots, etc. that I showed you in the very first one. It's more probably the field walls, etc., etc., that are not mapped or marked at all, or generally mapped. And here you can see some of them here. And up here in the distance, you can see these little short sections of wall for shelter for cattle in the winter time. Again, you can see what we call a tumble wall, and then which is probably, you know, probably Iron Age, and then the more recent wall, maybe 1700s, 1800. This is again from the top of this hill. This is where winterage takes place, a form of transhumance. And again, this is the area which they're grazing. This very little there. Today, by the way, it's still happening, but the farmers are supplementing the feed. Again, evidence, this is there on top of Capanawalla, a rainforest here, right up on top of the hill. I don't think it was marked actually in the I forget, perhaps some of these features definitely not marked in the map. And again, these, a more detail of these little stretches, short stretches of wall for cattle, presumably in the winter time. And of course, here is some of the best flowers, the dryas, here, gentians, etc. And so, you know, one of the things we were interested in was how long are these communities, these grassland communities, there for? I'm down in the Gortis Clare area now, and one of the things we poked around there was some of these gripes, these splits in the rock. You'll see us here. It's out of soil that was lost and washed in there. And of course, we found some of this and dated it as well. There are little bits of charcoal in it. But come back to our main interest. Our main interest was actually, we thought that these little peat sods, this shallow peat on the tops of these mountains, that this might contain a nice record of recent post-glacial history. And sure enough, it did. This top one, Capanawalla, goes from something like 1,500, in other words, the Bronze Age, up into recent times. And here you can see hazel, and this is the time when the top of the hill became bare of any woody vegetation. A little bit more astounding is the top of Capanawalla had actually a pine hazel woodland in the Bronze Age. This goes all against, actually, botanists have always said, oh, the Western Burn, those hills, they have always supported things like dryas and gentians and so on. There was never woodland there. It is there that they survived. But this certainly suggests that you had at least an open pine hazel woodland until clearance was affected, total clearance affected there. This, by the way, is about 500 BC here, when the pine wood was removed, presumably human intervention. And this one here, this is shorter in time, but you can see this same feature, this clearance in 1600, 1700, and here in this one, you can see the effects of the expansion of hazel, because the hazel you see in the burn today, that all came about post-famine. There was any of the ring counts that have been done indicate clearly there was nothing very much older than about 1880. Now, what I want to mention to you, why I highlight this a little bit is, Ingo got interested in not only the fossil pollen, but also some other stuff, what we call non-pollen palynomorphs. In other words, fossils that are not pollen. And he was able to identify and count quite a lot of these peculiar, mainly fungal spores. And some of those, like this one, this one, this one, are all well recognized spores of coprophilous fungi. In other words, fungi that grow on dung paths. Almost always from herbivores. And there's, I dumped it off there because I said I have so much stuff here that I dumped it. But in the previous one, he has a corresponding diagram from this, and he shows that it is in this phase that he's getting all these coprophilous fungal spores. So that is more or less, I take it as proof positive, that this is not something like the effect of, let us say, the Little Ice Age. It is grazing. It is the beginning, probably, of transhumance, this winterage that we have today. And so this one here brings together this Tapanawaya, got to Clare, and this is another diagram worked out in Northwest Bern many years ago, in the 90s, by an Australian student actually that I had. And it shows the features I've been telling you. First of all, the pine, woodland pine and hazel on Tapanawaya. Then you can see in this one here, what comes out quite nicely is this little late Iron Age lull, no plantago. It comes short, but it is clearly there. And then finally, on the very top, in around, as I say, 1600, 1700, this final clearance phase, Coprophilus fungal spores just preceding it, Coprophilus fungal spores here, there, here again, and actually this evidence would suggest that the present day grazing intensity is much less than what was there, let us say, pre-1900. So, how was my time? That I just mentioned this, we were writing this thing up, and luckily we hit on these papers by Tom Harrington mentioned Harrington is in UL, and he was in he is, I presume, wasn't he? And they were studying the fungal flora of the Burren, and especially these uplands. And they found 39 species of these ectomycorrhizal fungi. In other words, these are fungi that interact, live in the roots and help the plant to absorb nutrients. And 39 of these, they found they were exceptional because they found them in the uplands. Normally they're only associated with pine woodland. And actually, back in 2005, 2003, 2005, they said, well, possibly there were pine woodlands on top of these hills, but of course, who could say it with certainty? So here we have a situation where that these, we now can say with good degree of certainty that these ectomycorrhizal fungi are in fact as well relics from a time when you had pine, and they have just continued to live in this habitat. Okay. I was going to go to something different. But something that, again, something very different. And this is, just again, I think I'm hopefully not going to bore you to tears. This was a project we got involved in. It was a PRTLI funded thing that was in Galway, led by Billy O'Brien, who's now Professor of Archaeology in UCC. He was that time lecturer in UCG in Galway. And he got us involved in this project he had running down in Bors Peninsula, down in the Beara Peninsula. Now, here it is here, this is in the townland on the Beara Peninsula. And what was of real interest was, well, for him and for us as well, was all these pre-bog, I'll show you photos of them, field systems. Hickley set, nothing like big fields, but no, this Hickley set, then a big enclosure here, another little ring enclosure here. I just mentioned those. So, at the time, I'd inquired for a project from Annette Overland, and several of you know her, and she undertook this. And so these are just the main publications. Just to mention to you as well is that actually this one, it was actually written after what we have in this one. That this one was kind of between getting a book together always difficult, I suppose, and so I'm just mentioning that in the sense of that if there were any corrections, etc., we would have made them in the 2008, while you normally expect 2009 is more accurate or more whatever it is. Anyhow, just to give you an idea of this landscape, a very different landscape to what we've been seeing. On the right here this is where most of the archaeology is. There's a little lake down here which we covered. Just to give you again, this is a view from, we are standing about here, maybe in it, or just about there, the edge of that, and looking out towards, there's a Kenmare Bay, and firs, and then little bits of oak woodland, and this is, by the way, this is the Harrington house, the Harrington golfer. He's actually, that family is from, they're all Harringtons there, but that, he is from there, it's from there. And this, again, cultivation ridges, beautiful cultivation ridges in the place, intensive land use in the past. This is not these boundaries here, they are actually in the first edition of the Ordnance Survey map. So that was what was not of interest. What was of interest was the field, stone walls that were partially covered by peat. And I suppose I'm talking about this is just so that you'd see a landscape changing in this 2,000-year period that I'm talking to you about. So, and again, several of these walls were sectioned. This is the archaeologist sectioning the wall. This is that small ring feature at the top, which was fully excavated by the O'Brien Company. And then there is this, beside it was this very large ring enclosure with various features in it, including standing stones, huts. Yeah, pair of standing stones, huts, etc. Just again, I'm not going to deal a lot with the actual results, just to show you some pictures, to show you what we did. And this was a wet and miserable day when we went down to sample, and this was a nice trench that was open, and we actually sampled here at the side. And you know, these offer huge possibilities. Here, this is another trench where on this side slope coming down here, lots of soil erosion, soil had accumulated, etc. here. So, you know, again, evidence of land use. These fields walls, of course, offer lots of opportunities, like here. Like here, big stone removed, and so you have the pre-soil wall. You can investigate that. There it is again in detail. And again, I just popped up this one. I'm not going to go into it in huge detail. The wall was just here. This is the actually it was sitting on corresponding to this level. This is the pollen evidence. This is pre our time, as it were. It's B, just at the end of the BC, and then this is late BC, early AD, and here at this side there was some trees, actually mainly alder, and then after that it is no trees, quite a bit of plant, etc. Now, as I said, I don't want to go into the detail of it. I just want to give you an idea of the landscape and what we did here. This is in the middle of the archaeological site. Luckily enough, there was a little basin in which a bog had developed, and you can see the bog is just half cut away. Here's a bit of an oak stump here, oak trunk, cut off by the peat cutters, and here we are sampling this peat basin. So we have this small peat basin in the middle of the archaeological site, a little bit off from the archaeological site, this small lake. I showed it to you in the very first slide. We called it this, there was no name for it actually. And again, it was on a November weekend that we travelled off down to Bear to core this, and this is a knitter actually here. Coring this on, we were lucky that the weather we had a downpour just as we finished. Just to give you an idea of the cores, nice kind of lake glacial, the driest, the very beginning of the Holocene down here, and this is the sequence from one of the sets of cores. And again, I'm not going to discuss a huge results, lots of results, but I just popped up here for you the pollen diagram from the lake versus the pollen diagram from the bog. And these are only maybe a kilometre or so apart, but just even looking at this, you can see really different things. Like, for instance, here, the herbs, open areas, major changes. Here, much more subtle changes. So clearly, I think there are two things here. There's this little peat basin, and the peat itself is reflecting a somewhat different thing to what the lake is, and also the mechanism of pollen accumulation, etc., is also somewhat different between the peat basin and the lake. So I suppose I'm mentioning this is just, that the interpretation of these things is not always the easiest. Again, just to see here, as I say, the time scales, they're covering the same time scale. Here you can see there's substantial pine in the lake. Here there's a little bit of pine in these trees at the bottom, but actually very little pine. So I'm kind of, I suppose, pleading for some caution in these results, in interpreting these, and just to give you, without going into all the detail, just to give you an idea of the way we interpreted it. These are the time scales, just 80, we'll say, years north of 2,000 years we are thinking of. These are some of the archaeological features. That was that ring feature, and it turns out to be definitely end of the Iron Age. So much for late Iron Age law, Then, what I've plotted here is, these are the walls plotted to the time scale. So the walls are all in AD time. The earliest wall around north, it's around the time of the ring feature that was excavated in detail. A lot of the walls are at the end of the late Iron Age lull. And when we look at the peak growth, this is indicating peak growth here. Well, I think the positioning of this line here is at a time when I think the landscape was really transforming. In other words, it was becoming peat covered, the shallow peat was developing. And you can see here the date is about 1200. So it may not, this, I think myself, that the peat, this present landscape, it evolved actually in late medieval times, possibly as a result of the shift towards a wetter climate, and also, I think the general records from down here as well as our pollen records is less human impact. And you see today peat developing, let's say in Connemara, etc., over these cultivation ridges that are 50 years old. it's the natural process. So, but as you can see, I think our kind of conclusions have to remain tentative, but at least, I suppose, the only one place we do know more than we knew at the beginning of the evolution of this landscape. I have one final thing. Are you up for one final little bit? And this is, again, just to show you a few slides, a project, and yes, Overland as well has been made responsible for this. We were lucky enough to get involved in the investigations at Kilbegley. Now, Kilbegley, I never heard of it a few years ago. It just, even though, by you, Kilbegley Cemetery was on the main N6 road, it is labelled just outside Ballinasloe. It's actually in County Roscommon. Here it is here. And here it's relative location, near enough to Athlone, near enough to Clonmacnoise, near enough to Clonfert. All of important medieval sites. And of course, Athlone itself is a really important medieval town. This is the new road, the new motorway, and you are partly going over this site when you're travelling on the motorway. This is it from Google Maps. I put a little time ago, I took it last year. And the Kilbegley itself, here it is here, just at the, the roadway is partially running on it. This is Kill. With Kill, well, we know it's medieval, and this is the, there's a church, an old church site here, and a cemetery, and clearly this medieval settlement. I think the historians, archaeologists think it is an outpost from Clonmacnoise. So this is the site we're looking at. This is nice fertile land. This is then, actually this was all wetland. It's boggy, peaty, and now reclaimed, and you can see forestry on this partly reclaimed peat. This is the archaeological site. The road is now coming over these hills and running along here, and it is here that a horizontal watermill was discovered. And here is the road at basic construction. It was on the day actually we came out to take a core here in this wet area beside the field, beside the site. Kilbegley itself, you know, what is wonderful about it is the preservation of this horizontal waterway. It is just superb. Well, I think it's superb. I don't know nothing about these either before we started. This is the flume through which the water poured into the undercraft of the mill. The water came flying in here, the mill wheel was here, and tailways off out, the water flowed out here. And this here is part of the mill pond to have this supply of water to run this mill. Just give you some idea of some of the sampling we did in this. And this is the undercraft of the mill, and this is the flume, and sampled under the flume. I think I have a few photos of it. Sorry. That's slightly out. That's again, the flume, and you can see the tailways running off into the bog. This is the flume itself. And here is Niall Jackson, who was the director of the excavation. He is taking out samples for us here from beneath the flume. And obviously, so we had a look at these, and they were just amazing. They weren't really peat at all. They were like lumps of moss that you went out into a nice deep woodland, picked them up, and the preservation was just superb. You can see it here from these are some photographs we took. As I say, you could have, they were just beautiful. So Anita did pollen analysis, not all from these samples, to see what pollen was in the mosses was there, and we examined and identified the mosses themselves. And the thing about it is that now there was a full clear mid Bronze Age as well as outside, and so we one sample from there and there, and that is there. But these are the samples from beneath the flume, and these are all beautiful, fantastic woodland mosses. This as well is woodland moss. This as well, this only was in this. Obviously, the composition had changed. There's a long time. There's 1,000 years between them in age. And you can see Pollyanna is fine. You know, this was not a raised bog with lots of spike, this is not what you had here. Again, there's a little bit detailed pollen analysis of this. I've just put up here the summary. And just to contrast the pollen that came, so this woodland moss, it obviously, there was woodland around at the time. And that they went in and collected these. They had to be growing in the woodland, besides the mill site, presumably. This is a summary of the pollen in the full sphere, one sample, and then these 7 samples. Just, the contrast is huge. This is the arboreal pollen, the tree pollen. That is, by the way, the hazel, isn't it? Yes, this is hazel, of that arboreal pollen. So, you know, hugely different. You know, this must have been in a type of woodland as well. Pteridinium, the bracken fern, indicating openness in this, at this stage. Here, there's hardly any pteridinium. And then you see here, grasses and plantago. Grasses, and there's hardly any plantago in that one. So kind of totally different, closed woodland. And arable, very little actually in either of them. And you can see down at the bottom of it, carbon dates, and these are 1, 2, and that's from another site, but I've popped it in there. So the age of the male is about 800 AD, and this is obviously much, much older. It went into the early mid-Bronze Age. So we get I think a wonderful picture of exactly these environments that existed at these very different points in time. And they are points in time, because people had just gone out, collected it, and used it, and the thing was preserved. I just pop up one other, a little more, there are several pollen diagrams from here, but I'm only just going to pick out one. One that was the overflow channel. So this is the undercrop, this is the flume. This is the middle pond. And I think the archaeologists, my understanding of it is they think that this was a kind of a little channel that was cut here, bringing the water like that, so that, let us say, in times of flood, that the water didn't wreck this whole thing. It could divert off the water. And this is the sampling within this channel, the peat, the lower basal peat. This is it here, and you can see here the lower basal peat, when we took it, looked different. And this is the pollen diagram that has come from that. And again, I don't want to go into all the detail in it, but this is a radiocarbonate, which is close enough to 800 AG. What I do want to point out is that this is the cereal pollen. It's close on 30%. Now, 3% is massive in a pollen diagram, but 30%. And actually, we have summarized this and we've published it. But I see Macy here, and I'm thinking of the nice, wonderful Bible in Lough Kinane and the medieval from the Crannog, and there is something like this depicted there as well, because the activity was, the pollen diagram just comes from beside it, while other pollen diagrams have hardly any ciliate pollen. And in this site as well, this is, I think, the best evidence that there is for this site, that this mill was actually for cereal production, for grinding cereals. You know, it could be for binding, for using maybe something like flax or something else, as flax mills are needed. But this is, believe it or not, the best evidence. We thought we'd never find a cereal pollen in the whole thing. They're just, and just in this one sample. And what we think, and the archaeologists as well generally think, is that this sample has come about from maybe, this is what the mill would have looked like. We know it from the archaeology and also from, I think, historical descriptions. And the historical descriptions tell us that these mills had thatched roofs. So maybe summer winter, the thatch roof was blown off. The thatch would be of cereals, landed down in this overflow channel. It was nice and wet, and it was preserved, and here we have sampled it. Now, at last I come down to something about that some others have done, and I want to kind of wrap the whole thing up a little bit by trying to give you a bit of a summary, nothing very much, just a little bit of a summary. And I've pulled together we did this actually, Annette and myself, did this for this paper that was published on Kilbecky. And this is again the age going from old to young. You can see it's about the last 2,000 years. And here in this we have Unlockmore, we've seen Churchlock in Spoffin, you've seen Emla Bog is a site that Carol Malloy worked on, partly published. And you have things like the late Iron Age lull. In other words, these regeneration phases, you can see it in it. You can see the increase in